Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we wrestle with complex realities, slice through the noise, and try to synthesize the insights you need to be well-informed. Today, we are taking on a conflict that is, I think, really redefining the human experience. It's this collision between the classical liberal ideal of the fiercely independent, sovereign individual, something rooted in the philosophy of John Locke, and on the other side, the totalizing power of the modern, technologically enabled state.
And this is going to be a deep one. We're tracing a tension that is, philosophical, political, and even physical all at once. Our source stack for this is pretty wide-ranging. We have to be nimble. We're moving from foundational political theory, so Locke, Vogelin, Mises, all the way to neuroarchitecture and urban planning studies from São Paulo and Rio, and of course, cutting-edge analysis of global digital surveillance. We're really using the concept of social credit systems as the ultimate counter-thesis to that whole Lockean vision of individual freedom. It's the extreme end of what we're calling radical incorporation.
Right. So our mission here is to go beyond just policy and really get at the structural implications. We want to know, how does this fundamental fight, how does it impact the actual physical spaces we live in, the city itself, and, maybe most importantly, the psychological landscape of our own existence? This deep dive is really about the battle for sovereignty, both inside and out. So let's start at the very beginning with the thought experiment that kind of launched the modern idea of freedom.
Okay, so if you really want to understand individual freedom, you have to start with John Locke's baseline, his ultimate philosophical baseline. The state of nature. This is the thought experiment that really defines radical independence. It's the conceptual polar opposite of, well, the totalizing state we see emerging.
And can you just remind us what Locke's state of nature really is? Because it's often misunderstood as just, chaos, but it's more about radical autonomy, isn't it?
It is. It's absolute freedom, but coupled with natural law. So Locke saw this as an anarchic field of equal forces. Every individual is radically independent, and this is the crucial part. They're dependent only on themselves and on external nature, the crops they grow, the shelter they build, but absolutely not dependent on any pre-existing social force or human structure. The individual comes before the society.
Yeah.
You are your own master.
That is just the purest possible vision of self-sovereignty, and pretty much everything we do in society is, in some way, a compromise on that radical independence. We trade some of it for security or convenience.
Yeah.
But when you look at modern political reality, and especially the mechanics behind something like a social credit concept, you're staring at the absolute polar opposite. We go from individual sovereignty to total incorporation.
We shift from that Lockean independence to what the philosopher Eric Vogelin described as the total supremacy of a social organization. And this isn't just a strong government. It's an organization so powerful that it insists upon the radical incorporation of every individual.
What does that actually look like on the ground? Radical incorporation.
It results in the individual's total dependence on a total context. Vogelin argued this structure is kind of similar to how a communist planned economy operates. A situation where the individual literally cannot get basic necessities, a job, or even their own identity outside of the state-managed system. Your whole life, down to the smallest detail, is managed inside this total framework.
So if Locke is saying, I depend on myself, the total state is saying, no, you depend entirely on the context we provide. And the dynamic that determines where a society falls on the spectrum between that self-reliance and that incorporation, Vogelin defined it simply as domination.
That's the key metric. Totality in this context really just means a high degree of domination. This means that social structures, and it's so important to stress this, can be public, like a government, or private, like massive monopolies. They subject the majority of people to a situation of subjection. The individual's main relationship to the structure isn't free association, it's subordination.
Wow, and that realization just dramatically changes how you think about morality and ethics. If I'm the Lockean individual, master of my own domain, my moral life is mostly a matter of private ethics, my conscience, my choices, my relationship with natural law. But if I'm radically incorporated, the whole game changes.
Absolutely. The sources really dig into this profound shift. The existence of the individual increasingly turns from a problem of private ethics into a problem of public ethics.
Yeah.
I mean, think about how this plays out. In the Lockean world, if you fail to pay a private debt, It's a failure of private ethics. It's between you and someone else.
Yeah.
Personal responsibility.
But in the total state, or in a system that's aiming for total control, that private debt is immediately digitized. It's woven into a massive social credit profile. And then it becomes a matter of public ethics. It's a sign of your trustworthiness, your worthiness to even participate in the whole society. It affects your job, your travel, everything.
Your private failure is instantly collectivized, and it's weaponized by the system. That proves the ethical shift. And this foundational change is what fuels the existence of the modern welfare state
Yeah.
and really defines how power operates today.
And this leads to what might be the most complex moral point in the sources, the idea that true political neutrality is impossible when power is unequal.
It's a crucial insight about intervention. The sources analyze this and find that when powers in a society are unequal, simply standing aside, choosing non-intervention, is effectively an action in favor of the stronger power.
That's a powerful statement. So it means if a huge entity like a giant tech platform or a state agency is dominating a field and another powerful actor who could intervene does nothing, their inaction is basically an endorsement of that unequal power structure.
Exactly. Non-intervention is only truly neutral when powers are in balance. To the degree that a government or a powerful corporation can step in to lessen that subjection, not doing so means they are, in effect, endorsing it. This moral complexity ensures that on the plane of public ethics, every large organization with power is fundamentally an actor, not some neutral observer.
Okay, so the philosophical foundation of this total state is radical incorporation, and it's achieved through domination. Now let's bring in the engine. The thing that makes this theoretical state technologically possible in the 21st century, the digital panopticon. This is the modern physical counterthesis to Lockean individual freedom.
Right. If the Lockean thesis is all about self-governance, the digital counterthesis is about total knowledge and control. And we can look at surveillance infrastructure in places often described as a laboratory of the future, like China, to see the extreme end of this centralization. We're talking about hundreds of millions of cameras monitoring all parts of the nation.
It's the sheer density, the ubiquity of it all that's staggering. But the real power is in the automation, right? It's not just people watching screens anymore.
It's the immediacy of the intelligence. It's actionable. Algorithms automatically detect specific situations. The example cited in our sources is amazing, detecting if someone is not wearing a face mask.
Oh.
That can be immediately registered as neglect or a lack of compliance. Then you have data processing centers analyzing massive streams of police data and surveillance feeds, and they report potential suspects directly to local police through mobile apps in real time.
That speed and centralization, that's what enables radical incorporation. It just eliminates the delay, the bureaucratic friction that used to be a kind of firewall between the state and the individual. But the scope of the monitoring also goes way beyond just public behavior.
Oh, way beyond. The system digs into really intimate metrics. It uses data aggregation to build this comprehensive profile of dependence and risk. We're talking about tracking highly personal changes like monitoring who recently moved cities, who was abroad, who consumes an exaggerated amount of electricity.
An exaggerated amount of electricity.
Yeah, which is an interesting proxy for economic behavior. Or whose cell phone was unregistered for a while.
Wait, monitoring electricity usage and unregistered phones, that is terrifyingly intrusive. It shows the system isn't just designed to track known violations. It's designed to flag anomalies, any deviation from a centralized, expected pattern of life.
That's precisely the definition of a total context. If you deviate from the norm, you become a subject of scrutiny.
Yeah.
And that just reinforces the pressure to conform. This is the structural mechanism that makes that philosophical concept of radical incorporation a digital reality.
Okay, now let's pivot to the global implication. Because this kind of surveillance doesn't always need an overtly authoritarian state to work. It also needs our participation. Which brings us to this chilling concept of the Homem-Caracol, the man-snail.
The Homem-Caracol is a perfect metaphor for the psychological shift that's inherent in our network society. It refers to the individual who willingly carries control devices with them, smartphones, wearables, and engages in a form of self-discipline. They become, in effect, their own do-it-yourself mini panopticos.
So we carry the control mechanism, which means we internalize the gaze of the totalizing system. What's the psychic burden of that kind of self-vigilance?
The psychic cost is immense. It requires the individual to constantly anticipate the data footprint they're leaving behind. I mean, why do you check your Uber rating before you request a ride? or meticulously curate your professional profile
Right.
is because you need to ensure you belong to the networked society. The need to participate, to get a job, to get social acceptance, even basic services. It compels the individual to produce this infinite stream of very carefully managed personal data points.
We're self-disciplining not because a guard is watching us, but because our access to our own social context depends on maintaining an acceptable digital score. If the Lockean individual was free out in the wild, the man snail is voluntarily encased in his own data shell just to survive inside the city.
And this is what makes the legal fight over data sovereignty so challenging. We have these phenomenal normative frameworks that are aimed at protecting the individual, like the GDPR in the EU and the LGBT in Brazil. These establish the rights to informative self-determination and data protection. They treat control over your personal data as a fundamental right of citizenship.
So these laws define the ideal, right? That the individual should have ultimate control over their private sphere. But does the technology itself respect those boundaries?
Well, the sources are pretty blunt about it. While the law defines the ideal, the practical reality is that the free circulation of personal data is a reality of the network society. The law tries to regulate the flow, but the technological infrastructure facilitates a continuous, globalized exchange that is constantly outpacing any attempts at control. It just erodes that ideal of informative self-determination. The man-snail willingly participates, and the network ensures the data flows freely, regardless of any regulatory borders. Hashtag 1.3, the economic structure of control.
This totalizing vision, it relies on more than just cameras and data. It needs a specific, non-market economic structure to sustain that absolute control. And this brings us to Ludwig von Mises and his devastating critique of the total state economy, or socialism.
Mises laid bare the foundational economic difference. In a total state economy, the government has full control over production and distribution. It operates under an absolute monopoly. And here's the core distinction. This management system is not required to adjust to what consumers want or to the market at all.
Which is the complete inversion of a decentralized market. I mean, the market, in theory, is supposed to act like a democratic mechanism, right? Transferring power from the producer to the consumer.
Exactly. The entrepreneur in a capitalist society has to daily justify his social function by being subservient to what consumers want. If they fail to obey the orders that are transmitted by consumers buying or not buying, their mandate is quickly revoked. The market is a continuous check on power through competition.
But the total state removes that critical check. If I'm the government agency producing something or providing a service, and I have an absolute monopoly, I never have to face that financial or competitive test.
And this is where Mises identified the deeper problem, what he called the economic calculation problem. Without market pricing, which is based on competitive forces, the governing authority lacks the rational mechanism to allocate resources efficiently. They don't know the true cost or the true demand. They become an authority above the people with irrevocable powers, thinking and acting for the community on their own terms, without tolerating any interference from outsiders, be they consumers or political opponents.
So total control doesn't just centralize political power. It necessarily destroys the rational economic feedback loop, and it replaces efficiency with ideological dictate.
The logic just reinforces itself. To maintain economic control when you've destroyed the price mechanism, you have to rely on greater political force and surveillance to compel compliance and hide how inefficient you are. It forces more and more domination to compensate for economic failure.
And what political ideology typically underpins this drive for total centralized control? What justifies destroying both Lockean rights and market dynamics?
Mises connected this extreme control to aggressive nationalism. He argued that total incorporation often stems from the doctrine of the unlimited solidarity of all members of a linguistic group. This kind of intransigent particularism insists that the specific linguistic or tribal or national group is the only legitimate social collectivity worthy of ultimate loyalty and resources.
So Mises is basically saying that this hyperlocal aggressive tribalism is the prerequisite for total economic and political control because it provides the moral justification for excluding everyone else.
Precisely. This ideology stands in direct opposition to the concept of the great society embracing all human beings, which is a more universal, cosmopolitan, and ultimately a more Lockean liberal vision. The political struggle inherent in the rise of the total state, therefore, becomes the fight of humanity against this narrow, aggressive, and intransigent particularism. It's the struggle for universal cooperation against a kind of tribal self-interest which is used to justify the centralized control we've been talking about. Okay, we've established the philosophical and economic imperatives of the total state in part 1. Now, let's move this conflict from the abstract realm of theory and data flow to the concrete physical battleground, the city itself. If the total state wants radical incorporation, the first place it has to colonize is the street corner and the building itself.
This is where the tension becomes immediately tangible. On one side, you have the impulse of the total city toward this hyper-efficiency through digitization. On the other side, you have the human need for permeable, social, and healthy physical space. Hashtag 2.1, the digital city brain versus the human experience.
Let's start with that centralizing force, the smart city promise. The sources talk about the convergence of AI, IoT, and these cyber-physical systems, or CPSOS, to create urban digital twin systems, UDTs. This sounds like pure optimization.
It is the ultimate city brain concept. The goal is a pioneering foundational framework that integrates real-time analytical capabilities with predictive modeling. Just imagine a digital simulation of the entire city running parallel to the physical one, constantly optimizing everything. And what are the promised benefits of that?
Well, we're talking about achieving urban efficiency, resilience, and sustainability through things like adaptive traffic signal control, where the lights change based on real-time flow, not a fixed timer, or sophisticated systems managing waste collection and energy distribution in huge urban environments like Singapore and New York. The system is just constantly observing, predicting, and adjusting.
So the city brain is like the benevolent dictator of infrastructure. But we already know from the Lockean critique that centralization is inherently risky. What are the specific vulnerabilities here?
The critical risk, and it mirrors that Vorgelinian fear of domination, is that this technological flood, if it's uncontrolled, leads to a regime, global de vigilancia social, global social surveillance regime. It concentrates power, but it also concentrates vulnerability. Because these systems rely entirely on real-time data flow to function, they pose enormous digital risks, including, system failure or abuse by a central authority.
So the city brain represents centralization, but the technological world is already moving toward a kind of counter-thesis, Web 3.0 and this concept of spatialization.
What's so fascinating is how the next generation of digital infrastructure inherently challenges that centralized UDT model. Web 3.0 involves spatialization. It's the embedding of digital content and interactions beyond the screen and into the physical world, and it's facilitated by decentralized data and ubiquitous intelligence.
Spatial computing like augmented reality. You're layering information onto the physical world using the street as the interface.
Correct, but the key difference from the city brain is the data architecture. Spatialization relies on decentralized and distributed systems, which inherently increase access and, critically, create a wider circle of trust among diverse participants. You're moving the ability to control and verify information away from a single centralized authority and distributing it across the entire network.
Okay, so if the city brain is the epitome of radical incorporation, demanding all data be fed into one central point for optimization, Web 3.0's spatialization offers a technological path, if it's done right, to a more Lockean ideal. Individual control over which digital layers you interact with, and a smaller, more trusted context.
It offers the potential for a physical space that is digitally permeable and customizable, rather than digitally managed and opaque. It really presents an opportunity for technology to enhance individual agency rather than erode it.
The battle for control happens digitally, but it also happens on the ground. And the physical structure of our cities, specifically this hyper-efficient car-centric model, is failing us. It's leading directly to a sedentary crisis.
The numbers are just staggering. They link our urban design directly to massive public health costs. We are looking at a combined 3.2 million annual deaths caused by physical inactivity and another 3.7 million from air pollution exposure. When we prioritize the car over the human body, we are literally shortening lifespans and increasing lifestyle diseases. It's an urgent public health imperative to reclaim the street for people.
How do we even measure success in that? This brings us to the idea of caminabilidade, or walkability.
The Walkability Index is a measure of quality that assesses urban space conditions solely from the pedestrian's perspective. It looks at three main factors. Accessibility, are there continuous sidewalks? Attractiveness, is there shade, seating, interesting things to see? And safety, are there traffic conflicts or physical hazards like potholes?
And in places like São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro, where walking is actually the most used mode of transport, the urban conditions are fundamentally hostile to pedestrians.
It creates a severe paradox. The mode of transport that is the most necessary, the most sustainable, and the most universally accessible walking is systematically the least prioritized in infrastructure spending and planning. It's a physical manifestation of that subjection Vogelin described. where the strongest actor, the car, just dominates the space.
The sources outline a pretty clear corrective for this: the funnel of prioritization for transport.
Right. This hierarchy places pedestrians and cyclists at the absolute top, recognizing their zero emissions and health benefits. They're followed by public transport, then cargo that's necessary for economic function, and finally, cars and motorcycles at the very bottom. The Brazilian Traffic Code, the CTB, it legally mandates pedestrian preference over motorized vehicles, which shows that the legal ideal exists even if the urban reality doesn't.
So when that top-down planning is too slow or too bureaucratic or too centralized to implement this human-centered priority, the city fights back using tactical urbanism.
Tactical urbanism is the grassroots antidote to that slow-moving total city planning. These are quick, temporary, and low-cost interventions. Think of parklets, where you take one or two street parking spots and convert them into public seating areas. It enhances urban permanence and social life. It's a fast, cheap way to demonstrate the value of human-scale space.
A great example of success was that Repensando Santana program in São Paulo, which focused on high accident areas.
That program showed that by focusing on traffic calming measures, reducing speed, prioritizing pedestrian crossings, using things like colorful paint and temporary planters, you can drastically improve safety and quality of life immediately. The sources also mentioned successful reprogramming in Manhattan's meatpacking district, where a simple diversion of traffic freed up an asphalt triangle and they turned it into a pocket plaza. This bottom-up, immediate success proved that human-scale design isn't just a nice-to-have, it's a vital economic and social engine.
And finally, integrating social inclusion into the very design of the city through this concept of urban porosity.
Urban porosity, championed by thinkers like Richard Sennett and Stavros Stavridis, refers to cities that are not walled off or rigidly structured by function. They're open to encounter, circulation, and the presence of different bodies and trajectories. A city with high porosity offers greater possibilities for social inclusion.
How does that connect to vulnerable populations?
It's particularly critical for vulnerable groups, like people experiencing mental distress. When a city is porous, meaning it allows for diverse pathways, spontaneous interactions, and spaces that feel welcoming rather than rigidly controlled, it helps break down the physical and symbolic barriers that often restrict the mobility and social insertion of these groups. The design of the street itself becomes an act of care. It resists the rigid categorization imposed by the total city model.
That connection between the urban environment and mental well-being is so often overlooked, yet the sources show it's direct and it's critical. If the city can contribute to mental suffering through stigma and restricted mobility and vulnerability, then architecture must be an instrument of healing.
That's the core mandate of neuroarchitecture. It translates neuroscience principles into design guidelines that are aimed at promoting mental health, comfort, and security. It starts with the most basic biology, the thalamus.
The thalamus is basically the brain's traffic cop.
Yeah, exactly. It's a deep central part of the brain that regulates human behavior based on environmental information. It processes nearly all sensory input: sight, sound, touch, before that information reaches the more sophisticated cerebral cortex. By understanding how the thalamus reacts to specific stimuli, designers can essentially pre-calculate environmental factors to promote desirable mental states like calm or focus or security.
What are the most powerful design principles that the sources identify? Let's start with light.
Light is paramount. It regulates our circadian cycle, which dictates our mood, our energy, our sleep patterns. Cold blue light, which mimics the midday sun, promotes alertness. It's useful for high activity or learning areas. Conversely, warm light, which evokes the early morning or late afternoon sun, triggers rest and relaxation. Maximizing natural light and ventilation not only reduces energy consumption, but it helps synchronize the user's internal biology with the environment.
And what about the psychological power of integrating nature into design?
That's the principle of biophilia, our innate human connection to life and natural systems. Contact with nature gardens, abundant vegetation, even just external views. It helps reduce stress, it lowers the perceived thermal impact through evapotranspiration, and it significantly contributes to comfort and visual integration. I mean, a room with a view of a tree or a green space is fundamentally more conducive to recovery than a room facing a concrete wall.
This moves design beyond just function and into therapeutic practice. And we see this applied practically in projects like the CIPS, the psychosocial care centers.
The design goals for these healing environments are a direct reflection of neuroarchitecture principles. They focus on maximizing natural light and ventilation to support the patient's biological rhythms. For instance, waiting halls are often specifically located toward a central patio or garden to promote comfort, interaction, and reduce the inherent stress of waiting in an institutional environment.
And the planning of circulation becomes critical too.
Yeah, circulation is carefully planned to facilitate integration between sectors, to encourage social interaction and a sense of community, while at the same time providing pathways that ensure a sense of security for vulnerable users. The architecture becomes an active partner in treatment, helping to manage sensory input and foster social inclusion. It's a fundamental rejection of the rigid clinical architecture of the past.
We've dissected the battle on the political plane in part one and on the street level in part two. But the ultimate defense against the total city, the system that wants radical incorporation, it has to reside in a territory the state can never fully colonize, the individual's inner world. And this brings us to existential philosophy and the ultimate act of resistance.
Right, so we turn to Viktor Frankl and logotherapy, which provides the ultimate inner defense of the Lockean individual in the face of total domination. Logotherapy is built on three core pillars: freedom of will, the will to meaning, and the sense of life.
And the power of Frankl's work comes from the fact that he tested this under the most extreme conditions imaginable, the concentration camps, proving that the decisive factor is decision, the freedom of choice.
Even when stripped of all external freedoms, mobility, property, dignity, Frankl observed that the human being retains the absolute inherent freedom to choose their attitude toward those conditions, to act freely as a responsible being. This is the essence of ultimate individual resistance. It's the internal refusal to be wholly determined by external forces in spite of the worst conditions.
It is the ultimate act of sovereignty. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control what you make of it. And this freedom extends, paradoxically, even to suffering itself.
Most systems try to eliminate or, medicalize suffering. Frankl found meaning right there in the tragedy. Meaning is not found by avoiding pain, but by seeing a meaning in it. When an individual can grasp a purpose, even a personal one, they can mold their predicament into an accomplishment or turn tragedies into a personal triumph. If they lack a sense of life, they might be compelled to do something to live by, like follow rules, but they can't see anything to live for.
And this is so critical because the social credit system attempts to provide a meaning. The meaning of compliance, of utility, of perfect citizenship to live by. Frankl provides the antidote, the self-chosen meaning to live for.
And this choice is inextricably linked to time. Frankl's concept of transitoriness as responsibility is incredibly powerful. Life is transient, but only in its potentialities, the things we could do.
But once we act, once we choose, that potential is realized.
And once realized, that potential becomes an irrevocable reality. It's saved and guarded forever in the past. This is the most beautiful philosophical defense against the total city, as Frankl says. In the past, nothing is irretrievably lost, but everything is irrevocably guarded.
So our ultimate responsibility lies entirely in the ethical decision of which possibility to realize, which immortal footprint to leave behind. That past, once it's realized, is secure from any future imposition or erasure by the total state.
This is why logotherapy is inherently activist. The pessimist looks forward and sees the calendar running thin. They fear mortality. The activist looks backward and proudly reviews the richness of their past achievements, their brave choices, their sufferings borne with bravura. They have already banked their meaning in an irrevocably guarded past, making the passage of time a source of pride, not fear. It's an act of internal self-possession. Hashtag 3.2, the preservation of memory and identity.
If the individual guards their past through Frankl's ethical choices, then the city has to guard its collective past through memory and identity, especially against the homogenizing, standardizing forces of modernization.
Memory and the right to memory are constitutive of the right to public space. When cities modernize, there's often a political impulse to sanitize or standardize the urban narrative, to erase anything messy or discordant. However, public space has to be, inherently, a site of permanent negotiation and dispute, not a place for the erasure of differences.
And this tension explains the intense modern conflicts we see around historical monuments or images that embody painful or contested memories.
Contesting those images and monuments is absolutely essential for a democratic city. If citizens are deprived of the right to question the specific memories embedded in the urban landscape, say, the statue of a problematic historical figure, they're also deprived of the right to question and occupy public space. The integrity of the city's memory is directly linked to the democracy of its public domain. If the memory is locked down, the political space is locked down.
The sources mention a culture of patrimonial proliferation, where conservation is happening at this frenetic pace. How does urban identity factor into this effort?
Urban interventions, even micro-scale ones like choosing specific street furniture or paving materials. They only gain true transformative power when they carry traits of the local urban identity. If the design ignores the collective history, the traditions, or the meaning assigned to a space by the local populace, it fails. It just becomes another imposition, another top-down mandate, and it fails to resist the social superficialization and cultural homogenization we often see with large globalized urban centers. Identity is the resistance against the generic total city blueprint.
We've looked at philosophical and historical defenses. Now let's turn to a really practical tool for decentralization: 3D printing. This technology shifts the power of construction and creation away from centralized, large-scale industrial control.
3D printing, or additive manufacturing, it really represents a paradigm shift. It allows for the construction of future cities that are sustainable and highly customizable, challenging those traditional industrial constraints. A key principle here is modularity.
How does modularity enhance the urban environment?
Well, modularity, the design of interchangeable components, it enhances adaptability, reconfigurability, and sustainability. For example, urban furniture or structural components can be easily rearranged, expanded, or replaced based on changing user needs without having to demolish the entire structure. This contributes significantly to circular economy principles by reducing waste and extending the lifespan of materials.
And the scalability is one of its biggest advantages over conventional construction, I'd imagine.
Yes, it is seamless. 3D printing allows for scaling from the smallest urban detail, like a custom bench designed to reflect local identity, all the way to full-scale residential structures. Large-format additive manufacturing, particularly with concrete, is already enabling these complex geometries that would be too costly or structurally impossible using conventional methods.
This technology also offers a direct, powerful solution to the global housing shortage, particularly social housing, and it addresses the ethical failures of past state-run housing projects.
That's critical. Historically, state housing often suffered from this functionalist reduction of social housing to minimum housing or cheap housing, which severely compromised quality, identity, and comfort. 3D printing challenges this by providing high efficiency alongside architectural adaptability and user customization.
So it allows for individualized design within a standardized, efficient process.
Exactly. By using a kit-of-parts approach with pre-assembled modules, 3D printing drastically enhances construction efficiency. It cuts down the need for human labor to as few as 3 people on site. It moves away from the bland, standardized blocks of the total city model and allows users to regain a sense of ownership and identity in the dwellings. It fulfills the human need for unique, tailored shelter. Hashtag tag 3.4 philosophical synthesis on technology and the state.
Okay, we've traced this conflict from Locke to logotherapy. Let's conclude by going back to the deepest layers of political thought to understand why this totalizing state impulse keeps resurfacing historically and connect it to the technological drive.
We can synthesize these themes through the historical lens offered by Vogelin and others. In the medieval period, you had thinkers like Thomas Aquinas who achieved a remarkable synthesis. They balanced these transitional social forces, the growing populace, the natural prince or ruler, and the independent intellectual, into a coherent system.
This created a stable political environment that recognized a precursor to Locke, a community of politically free men alongside a society of commercial property owners, a reconciliation of temporal power and individual freedom.
It was a balanced system, recognizing both spiritual and temporal authorities. But the sources suggest that modernization shattered this harmony. It led to the decomposition of speculation on the uno, on the unified truth. And this breakdown is attributed specifically to Cartesian philosophy.
Cartesian methodological doubt, the focus on inquiry inward, on the ego.
Yes. By focusing solely on the internal subjective self, Cartesian doubt broke the fundamental identity of spirit and nature. It founded modern critical epistemology. The shared, immediate reality of nature and spirit was lost, and it was replaced by an external world that had to be reconstructed solely through individual human reason.
So if that shared spiritual meaning is withdrawn, the crisis of Christianity that Pascal identified humanity is left in a void, and the total state rushes in to fill that vacuum with its own absolute man-made order.
Precisely. Vogelin viewed the totalizing tendency as a consequence of this spiritual withdrawal. When institutional spiritual mediation weakens, the individual is left to interpret existence solely through immanent categories, only what exists here and now, what's measurable and manageable. This leads to a non-Christian immanentist anthropology, famously championed by Nietzsche, where the focus shifts entirely to force, power, utility, and the destruction of the symbolic or the transcendent.
So the digital city brain, the social credit system, the total surveillance infrastructure, these are the ultimate technological expressions of this historical spiritual crisis. It's an attempt to impose absolute, measurable, imminent order because that external shared meaning has been lost.
The technological drive towards total control is the most powerful modern tool for this imposition of immanent order. It's the highest expression of organizing life through measurable force and utility, rather than through transcendent meaning or inherent individual sovereignty. The struggle between the Lockean individual and the total city is truly a struggle for the soul of modern existence. It's determining whether we are free agents or radically incorporated components.
And that profound historical arc, showing that technology is always intertwined with power structures, brings us right back full circle to the individual choice. Hashtag outro. This deep dive has revealed, I think, the profound nature of the conflict playing out today. It's this collision between the radically independent Lockean ideal and the digital age aspiration for the total city, which seeks radical incorporation and optimization by fundamentally blurring the line between private action and public ethics.
We saw that defense requires a three-front battle: the legal fight for data sovereignty, the urban fight for human-scale design and community-led activism, and the technological fight for decentralized infrastructure like Web 3.0 and 3D printing. But the sources point to a final, irrevocable defense that lies within.
The territory the total state can never truly claim.
Yes, the most profound defense against technological authoritarianism isn't just external regulation. It's the personal existential act described by Frankl, recognizing that our potentialities are essentially transitory.
Mm.
Our freedom, our ultimate autonomy, lies entirely in the ethical decision we make to realize those possibilities that give our lives lasting, individual meaning, creating a past that is irrevocably guarded from external control.
So if the total city wants to control your future potential through data and surveillance, the ultimate Lockean defense is recognizing the power of your past reality.
The question we leave you with, therefore, isn't about the latest algorithm or the smartest sensor, but what are you actively choosing to commit to your protected, irrevocable past today? What decision are you making right now that the total state can never touch, that is already saved and guarded forever?